I was standing in the kitchen a few months ago, staring at my phone, trying to remember the last time it rang, because one of my kids called just to talk. It wasn't a dramatic moment. The kettle was on, the dog was scratching at the back door. It was late afternoon, the quiet time of day that feels longer than it should. I checked my call history the way I sometimes do. Mostly appointment reminders, a pharmacy notification, one missed call from a neighbor, nothing from them. I'm 74 now. You'd think by this age you'd have yourself figured out. I don't. For a long time, I told people my kids were busy. That's what everyone says, right? They have their own lives, careers, children, mortgages. I said it casually, like I understood, like I wasn't bothered. And at first, I think I believed it. But after a while, the gaps between calls weren't just weeks, they were months. Birthdays became quick texts. Holidays were sometimes rescheduled because something else came up. When they did visit, it felt scheduled, efficient, 2 hours, lunch, back on the road. I told myself that was normal. Times change, families grow apart a little. That's life. It took me a long time to admit I might have had something to do with it. When they were young, I worked a lot. That part is true. I was proud of that. I grew up with very little, and I promised myself my kids wouldn't. I built a small construction business from the ground up. Long days, early mornings, weekends sometimes. I told myself I was doing it for them, and I was. But not only for them. Work made sense to me. You show up, you do the job, you get paid. Problems had solutions. You fix what's broken, you move on. Home was different. Feelings were messier. I didn't know what to do with them. At dinner, I would ask about school. They'd start talking about something that happened with a friend or a teacher or some small drama that felt huge to them. I'd listen for a minute, then I'd jump in with advice. Just ignore it. Work harder. Don't let that bother you. I thought I was helping. I thought that's what fathers did. Provide answers, provide direction. What I didn't do was ask how they felt about it. I didn't sit in it with them. I'm not exaggerating. If they got upset, I'd get uncomfortable. I'd say something like, "You're overthinking this." My wife used to give me a look across the table sometimes, not angry, just disappointed. I didn't understand it then. There were small moments I brushed off. My daughter once asked if I could come to her school play rehearsal because she was nervous. I told her I'd try. I didn't. There was a project deadline. I figured she'd understand. My son wanted to show me a drawing he'd worked on for days. I glanced at it and said, "That's good," while flipping through mail. I remember that clearly now. He stood there a second longer than usual, waiting for something else from me. I didn't notice at the time. I was tired most evenings. I'd sit in my chair, watch the news, and tell myself I deserved the quiet. If they argued, I'd raise my voice quickly. Enough. I've had a long day. Looking back, I see a pattern. Not cruelty, not abuse, just distance. When they were teenagers, the house got louder and then quieter. Slamming doors, short answers, long stretches in their rooms. I blamed hormones, the usual stuff. If one of them tried to challenge me, I took it personally. I'd say, "As long as you live under my roof," you know the line. It worked in the sense that it shut down the argument, but it also shut down something else. I didn't apologize much. I saw apologies as weakness. I thought being steady meant being firm. There was a night my daughter came home late from a friend's house. She was 15. I was worried, but I expressed it as anger. I didn't ask where she'd been or if she was okay. I just lectured her. She cried. I told her to stop being dramatic. She stopped talking after that. Not immediately. I'm not exaggerating, but gradually. She stopped telling me where she was going, who she liked, what she was afraid of. She told her mother instead. I didn't notice the shift until it was already there. My son tried to talk to me once about feeling overwhelmed in college. He called late at night. I remember I was half asleep. He said he wasn't sure if he had chosen the right major. I told him, "You'll figure it out. Everyone feels that way. Just stick it out." He got quiet, said okay. We hung up. What I heard was reassurance. What he might have heard was dismissal. It's hard to admit that you weren't the parent you thought you were. I always believed I was reliable. I paid the bills. I showed up when it mattered, at least in the ways I understood. I never missed a tuition payment. I fixed their cars. I helped them move apartments. But I didn't sit on the edge of their beds and ask what scared them. I didn't tell them when I was scared either. After my wife passed 8 years ago, things changed more quickly. She had been the bridge, the soft place in the family. Without her, the calls slowed even more. At first, they checked in often, asking if I was eating, if I needed help with paperwork. I told them I was fine. I always said I was fine. I didn't want to be a burden, but fine became the only thing I ever said. If they asked how I was doing, emotionally, I'd brush it off. I've had a long life. I'm okay. I never told them about the nights I couldn't sleep, about the way the house felt too quiet, about sitting at the kitchen table longer than necessary because going to bed alone felt heavier than I expected. They tried. I can admit that now. They invited me over. I declined sometimes because I didn't want to drive at night, or because I didn't want to feel like the extra chair at their table. Pride is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It just makes decisions for you. There was a Thanksgiving about 3 years ago. My son asked if I could help peel potatoes. I said I'd rather stay out of the way. I meant it as politeness. I'm not exaggerating. He said, "Dad, it's okay. You can help." I waved him off and sat in the living room. I watched television while I could hear them laughing in the kitchen. Later, when I drove home, I told myself they didn't really need me there anyway. I've spent a lot of years telling myself stories like that. It wasn't one big argument that made them stop calling. It was smaller things, accumulated, years of conversations cut short, feelings minimized, invitations declined, advice given when listening was needed. About a year ago, my daughter visited alone. We sat at the table with coffee. There was a long pause. She said, "Dad, can I tell you something without you trying to fix it?" That sentence stayed with me. I said, "Yes, I meant it." She told me that growing up, she often felt like she had to manage her emotions around me, that if she was too sad or too angry, it made me uncomfortable, that she learned to handle things on her own because it felt easier than explaining them to me. I wanted to defend myself, to say I did my best, that my father never talked about feelings at all, but I didn't know how. Instead, I said I didn't realize. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't even very articulate, but it was the first time I didn't argue back. She didn't cry. She wasn't angry back. She wasn't sayful. She was just matter of fact. That almost hurt more. After she left, I sat in the same chair. I've sat in the same chair I sat in for years. I thought about how often I'd chosen comfort over connection, how often I'd avoided hard conversations because I didn't know what to say. Avoidance can look like strength from the outside. You stay calm, you don't overreact, but inside it builds walls. I built a lot of walls. I used to think being a good father meant being solid, dependable, not too emotional, not too needy. I see now that I confuse distance with steadiness. There are things I still struggle with. When my son calls and starts venting about work, I feel the old urge to solve it, to give him a plan. Sometimes I catch myself and say, "That sounds frustrating." It feels awkward, like I'm speaking a second language. Sometimes he pauses, surprised. Then he keeps talking. The calls aren't frequent, but they are a little longer than they used to be. I don't think we'll ever be the kind of family that talks every day. That's not who we are. And I don't expect some grand reconciliation. Life doesn't really work that way. I started small. When I think about them, instead of waiting for a reason, I send a message, not advice, just something simple. Saw something today that reminded me of you. Sometimes they respond right away. Sometimes they don't. I try not to read too much into it. I've also started being more honest. When they ask how I am, A few weeks ago, my daughter called and asked what I had been up to. I told her the truth, that I had been feeling a little lonely lately. The word felt heavy coming out. There was a silence. Then she said, "I'm glad you told me." That was it. No dramatic conversation. But it felt different. I still catch myself wanting to retreat. When they disagree with me about something, I feel that old tightening in my chest, the urge to shut it down, to assert myself. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I have to call back later and say, "I was too sharp earlier. It doesn't come naturally to me. It feels clumsy, but I'm trying." I don't think my children stop calling because they don't love me. I think they stopped because over time calling me didn't feel easy. It felt like stepping into a space where they had to filter themselves. That's a hard thing to sit with at 74. There's a kind of grief in realizing you can't go back and redo the small moments. The school play, the late night college call, the dinner table conversations I cut short, but there's also something steady about facing it, not fixing it, just facing it. I don't blame them anymore. I don't blame myself in a harsh way either. I did what I knew how to do. It just wasn't always what they needed. If I'm honest, I'm still learning how to be with them without trying to control the room. Still learning how to let a conversation breathe. Still learning how to say, "I don't know what to say, but I'm here." Some days I do better than others. The phone still sits on the counter most afternoons. Sometimes it rings, sometimes it doesn't. When it does, I try to answer with less expectation and more openness. When it doesn't, I try not to build stories in my head about what that means. At this age, I'm not looking for redemption. I'm not trying to rewrite the past. I'm just trying to be a little more available than I was before, a little more honest. I used to think time would automatically keep families close. I see now that time just reveals the patterns you've built. I built some distance without meaning to. I'm working slowly on building something else. I don't know exactly what it will look like, and I don't think it will ever be perfect. But when my daughter says, "Can I tell you something?" I try to say yes and mean it. That's where I am now, still learning, still uncomfortable sometimes, still proud in ways I probably shouldn't be. But at least I can admit why the phone got so quiet, and I'm not done trying to change that.